everyone, I'm Sarah and this is Budget Sew, where we create stylish, fashionable looks as inexpensively as possible. Today, we're doing a sew along to vintage McCall's 2138. If you like this video, please subscribe to Budget Sew and follow me on social media at Budget Sew. I bought McCall's 2138 for $2 at Good Value Thrift Store in downtown London, Ontario. This pattern was published in 1969 and is a dress pattern with or without long or short set-in sleeves and a center back zipper. The dress has princess seaming in the front and back and a faced and interfaced neck. The long sleeve dress, View A, has a detachable contrast collar and cuffs. The notched collar and cuffs are faced and bound with bias tape. The collar is included in the neckband facing seam. The short sleeve dress, View B, has a contrast lined dickie. The collar, neckband, and dickie are snapped to the underside of the dress. The sleeveless dress, View C, has faced armholes and a novelty trimmed neckline. I made View A with the long sleeves and detachable collar and cuffs. In addition, I made the dickie from View B for another look. So this gave me a total of 3 looks for this dress. The suggested fabrics were silk or cotton broadcloth, synthetic mixtures, shantung, surah, velveteen, velvet, crepe, lightweight wools, gabardine, flannel, and satin. Flat fake fur is also recommended for View A. The contrast for View A should be satin, linen, and piqué. View B's dickie should be printed silks or cottons, voile, and metallic shears.
I chose to make my dress out of a printed queen size sheet that I bought for $6.99 at one of the Value Village thrift stores in London, Ontario. I think it was the one in the east end of town. Half the sheet was black, but the other half of the sheet was white with a black damask print. The sheet was 100% polyester and very lightweight. I love polyester because it's a great wash and wear fabric. I made the dress with the black part of the sheet and the cuffs, collar, and dickie from the printed part. I didn't have quite enough of the black fabric to have long sleeves, but I really wanted long sleeves. I pieced together the lower portion of the sleeves with 3 pieces of fabric. This meant that each of my sleeves were made up of 4 pieces. I top stitched the seams on the sleeve pieces to make them appear as if this were a feature of the dress, rather than me squeezing the sleeves out of the fabric. Once that was done, I pinned the elbow darts. I love that vintage patterns have these features. It's rare to see them on patterns now, but both this pattern and vintage McCall's 5136 have elbow darts. McCall's 5136 was published in 1959 and is a box jacket in 2 lengths, a slim 3-gore skirt, and a cap sleeve tuck-in or over blouse. You may remember this pattern from my McCall's 5136 sew-along video. The link to that video is at the top of the screen. Next, I pinned the cuffs. I didn't have quite enough pattern fabric for the undersides of the cuffs, underside of the dickie, or the underside of the collar and facing, so I used a white lining fabric that I bought from the Value Village thrift store in Stratford, Ontario. I'm not sure of the fiber content, but I think it's polyester. It's definitely a man-made fiber and it's very lightweight. This fabric was used to line the jacket of McCall's 5136. The white lining fabric won't be visible because it's the underside of the cuffs. Then I pinned the dickie front and dickie back together. Then the detachable collar's front neckband to the back neckband. Then I pinned the front facing to the back facing. Since I cut it very close to the fabric, I didn't have quite enough to place the front facing on a fold, so I pieced it together. It should look the same as the detachable collar's front band. Then I pinned the detachable collar's front neck band facing to the detachable collar's back neck facings. Then I pinned the dickie front facing to the dickie back facing. Here's where we get to the larger pieces of the pattern. First, I constructed the back of the dress. I pinned the center back seam to the circle where the zipper would start. Then I pinned the side backs to the back. I lengthened my dress pattern by 7 inches so that it fell below the knee. This pattern did not have any lengthen or shorten lines, so I tacked the 7 inches onto the bottom of the hem. Lengthening the dress is one of the reasons why I pieced together the black fabric for the sleeves. Then I pinned the shoulder darts. I just love when a pattern has shoulder darts. Since I have a narrow back, patterns with this feature tend to fit me better. Next, I constructed the front of the dress. I pinned the center front seam and then the side fronts to the front, easing in the front between the notches. Once I had pinned as much as I could, it was pedal to the metal, time to sew it. I started with the larger pieces. The instructions said, to construct the back, stitch the center back seam to the circle. Stitch the side backs to the back. I began with the side back to the back, taking my time with the curves. I sewed these seams with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I used black Coats & Clark all-purpose dual-duty thread that I bought from Value Village Thrift Store. As you know, I don't usually use second-hand thread when sewing my garments, but this thread was in a big bag of brand new Coats & Clark thread for $1.99. I've used this thread for so many sewing projects, including Simplicity 8243. Simplicity 8243 was published in 1998 and is a jumper or pinafore dress in 3 lengths with a back zipper, shoulder straps, and optional top stitching. Dresses A and B have straight skirts. Dress A has a back slit with a back tab with button trim. Dresses C and D are flared. Dresses A and C have self-buttoned belt and a removable bag with a flap. And dress D has an upper patch pocket with a flap. I made dress D with a flared skirt, but instead of the upper patch pocket, I made this self-buttoned belt with a removable bag. The only alteration that I made to this pattern was that I did not include the back zipper because I didn't think it was necessary. The link to the Sew Along to Simplicity 8243 is at the top of the screen. I struggled a bit here with my thread tension. It was too tight, so after this seam was sewn, I re-threaded my sewing machine. Then I sewed the center back seam starting at the bottom of the dress up to the circle. Well, that was the original plan. I changed my mind last minute and stitched all the way up the back of the dress. I was going to install an invisible zipper into the back, but then I decided at the last moment I was going to use a regular zipper instead, so I sewed up the back. Spoiler alert! In the end, I installed an invisible zipper. The pattern suggested machine basting the opening on the seam line for the zipper. It said center the zipper face down over the seam with the pull tab 1 1/8 of an inch from the neck edge. Baste On the stitch line, stitch 1/4 of an inch from the seam with a zipper foot. Then remove the basting. Next, I constructed the front of the dress. The instructions said, stitch center front seam. Stitch side fronts to front, easing in the fronts between the notches. Clip the curves as necessary when pressing the seams open. This pattern is a new sizing pattern from 1969. It said, before you cut, be sure to compare your body measurements with the new measurement chart on the back of the pattern envelope. You may wish to make minor fitting adjustments. Vintage pattern sizing is smaller than current clothing size. Pattern sizing was fairly standardized between the major companies for most of the 20th century. In 1968, the sizing was enlarged a little across the pattern industry. The new sizing logo appeared on pattern envelopes from 1968 through 1970 as customers adjusted to the changes. Some pattern companies such as Butterick and Vogue did not print copyright dates on their patterns. Checking for old or new sizing can often help determine an approximate date of printing. I like this note on the pattern. Patterns are made to body measurements. Ease is added for style and comfort. Make any necessary adjustments before placing the pattern on the fabric. The Easy Rule Guide is printed on the pattern for lengthening and shortening. See McCall's A Step-by-Step Sewing Book for other adjustments. This is a book that I hope to find when I'm out thrifting. I refer to my Mom's Simplicity Sewing Book a lot, and I recently bought Singer, the Complete Photo Guide to Sewing Book. Both books are so handy, and I hope to add the McCall's book to my library. This pattern showed cutting layouts for 112, 115, 138, and 153 centimeter wide fabric, but since my fabric was a queen size sheet, I used my own layout, making the best use of the fabric and keeping with the damask pattern and the grain of the fabric. Since my dress used only half the sheet, I had plenty of fabric left over for another project. Butterick 6168, a Lisette dress with lovely bodice detail. Stay tuned to BudgetSew for the sew-along of Butterick 6168. Another great tip listed in the pattern instructions was, select the pattern pieces to be used. Press each with a dry iron. I have not pressed pattern pieces since my mom first taught me to sew as a child. I remember she helped me sew a dolly dress for my Girl Guide sewing badge. I was thrilled with the fruits of my labor. I loved the dress, and it looked fabulous on my dolly. Pressing my pattern pieces is something that I should take the time to do to ensure that the pattern lies flat on the fabric. Next, I sewed the shoulder darts on the back of the dress. I sew my darts very much like McCall's 5136 instructions that said, to make darts, bring V-shaped lines together, wrong sides out. Then stitch along the dart lines to the point. I started at the widest point of the dart, backstitched my sewing, and then sewed it to the end of the point, leaving long tails of thread to tie off. Now, I've been reading my Singer, the Complete Photo Guide to Sewing book, and it suggested, rather than tying off the ends, to raise the presser foot and pull the dart towards the front. At about an inch or 2.5 centimeters, lower the presser foot and secure the thread by stitching several times in the fold of the dart with the stitch length set to 0. Then clip the threads. Then I sewed the detachable collar's front neck band to the back neck bands. Next, I sewed the front neck facing of the dress. This should have been one piece cut on a fold, but I was short of black fabric, so I cut 2 mirror pieces of each other, ensuring that there was 5/8 of an inch of extra fabric at the fold line so that they could be sewn together. Once that was done, I sewed the front neck facing to the back neck facings. Then I sewed the elbow darts. This time I started at the point of the dart, leaving long tails of thread, and sewed towards the edge of the sleeve. Next, I sewed the undersides of the cuffs. I switched to white thread to sew this seam. I also used white thread to sew the detachable collar's front neck facing to the detachable collar's back neck facings. Then I sewed the dickie front facing and dickie back facings together. Next, I pinned the sleeve seam. I'm really glad I top stitched the seam allowances down. Top stitching is basically a double purpose, holding seams flat and accenting them in a neat linear manner. It may be done in matching or contrast thread, depending on the effect you wish to create. In either case, the stitching must be straight and even, since it will show up distinctly on the finished garment. Next, I pinned the lining to the dickie along the outer edges, leaving a part of the seam free for turning. I left a small opening at the bottom of the dickie. This next step I messed up a couple of times. I originally pinned the two pattern pieces together and then the two white pieces together, but this was incorrect. Finally, I pinned one collar, which was the patterned fabric, to the collar facing, or the white fabric, and then I did the other side. Next, it was time for the cuffs. As I was digging through my scrap box earlier in the day, I saw that I had just enough of the pattern fabric left over to face the cuffs. The facings did not follow the grain of fabric. I squeezed them out on the cross grain. Then I pinned the facings to the cuff, right sides together along the upper edge. Next, it was time to install the zipper. I used a brand new vintage Lightning Zephyr 12 to 14 inch black invisible zipper that I bought at Good Value Thrift Store for 25 cents. This zipper and 5 other vintage zippers were still in the original packages. I bought 4 black, 1 white, and 1 bright purple zipper. The package advertised that these zippers are flexible with a nylon coil. They're lightweight yet as strong as metal. They launder and iron like nylon and have a memory lock slider. My favorite advertising point is that they're magically self-healing. The instructions on the zipper package are fantastic. They said turn the fabric right side up. Open the zipper. Place the zipper face side down with the left tape on the right seam allowance. Coil along the seam line. Zipper tape toward the cut edge of the fabric. Place the stop 3/4 of an inch from the top of the fabric to allow for a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. The instructions did not say that I had to do this, but I pinned and then hand basted the zipper in place. I find that if I don't baste it in place, it ends up going in incorrectly, and I have to unpick my work and re-sew it. Maybe I just need more practice sewing zippers in place. Another nice thing about the zipper package was that it has laundering and ironing instructions. It said, for iron temperatures higher than steam settings, protect the coils with a pressed cloth. Lightning Zephyr is unaffected by normal laundering and dry cleaning. The color will not chip, wear, or wash off. The nylon fasteners should be closed when laundered, dry cleaned, or ironed, or when being put through a wringer. At the sewing machine, I sewed the invisible zipper in place. The instructions said, lower foot, turning top stop and coil upright in the groove with your finger. Stitch slowly until the foot touches the slider. Backstitch carefully. I used my invisible zipper foot. The package from my zipper said, to ensure safe and satisfactory results, use this special lightning foot attachment, which can be adjusted properly for stitching the lightning nylon invisible zipper. The instructions continued. Straighten the right zipper tape and place face down on the left seam allowance. Fabric right side up. Top tape ends aligned. On stretchy fabrics, pin the end of the zipper for extra stability. Position the foot over the tape, top stop, and coil upright in the other groove. Stitch. Stitching must not catch any part of the turned up tape and coil. If it has, remove these stitches and carefully restitch. Straighten out the zipper and the fabric right side up. Press the fabric away from the coil and carefully close the zipper. If the zipper tape shows in the seam with normal tension, adjust the foot so the needle is closer to the coil and restitch. There's no need to remove the initial stitches. Then I sewed the rest of the seam below the zipper. The instructions said, to join the seam below the zipper, slide the foot to the left of the needle. Lower the needle into the fabric 3 to 4 stitches above the end of the previous stitching and as close as possible alongside it. Make sure the needle does not catch the end of the zipper tape. Lower the foot and by hand operating the machine, carefully stitch the remaining seam closed, using the power after the first inch of stitching. Then I sewed the sleeve seams. Then I sewed the lining to the dickie. The instructions said, stitch the lining to the dickie along the outer edges, leaving the part of the seam free for turning, grade seam, and clip curve. I love vintage patterns because they have different instructions than newer patterns. For example, the instructions for marking your fabric in this vintage pattern are much more detailed than a more modern pattern like Simplicity 1499 from 2013. Simplicity 1499 said, transfer markings to the wrong side of the fabric before removing the pattern. Use pin and chalk method or dressmaker's tracing paper and wheel. Vintage McCall's 2138 goes into much greater detail on marking your pattern. It gave 2 methods. The first was the pin and chalk pencil method. It said place pins through the pattern in 2 layers of fabric. Remove the pattern by pulling it over the heads of the pins. Draw a line along the pins with a chalk pencil and ruler on both sides of the piece. Remove the pins. The second method was the tracing wheel. It said, trace lines of the pattern with a tracing wheel. For a single thickness, lay 1 piece of tracing paper face up under the wrong side of the fabric. For double fabric, lay 1 piece of tracing paper face up under the fabric and another piece face down under the tissue pattern. Simplicity 1499 has the quick mark method. Snip edges of fabric to mark the notches, ends of fold lines, and center lines. Pin marks dots. This sounds like a quick and easy way to mark the fabric, but I prefer the vintage method of cutting the notches outward, as suggested in the pattern. Then I sewed the cuffs. The instructions said, stitch facing the cuff, right sides together, along the upper edge. Grade seam. The pattern instructions also have tips for your fabric. It says, press your fabric, shrink all fabrics not labeled as pre-shrunk, straighten ends, tear fabric or draw a thread across the fabric. It also recommended straightening the grain of the fabric. pull on the bias in opposite directions until the crosswise threads are squared with the salvages. Bonded and permanent finished fabrics cannot be straightened. Then I sewed the detachable collar. The instructions said, face collar sections right sides together. Stitched unnotched edges along the seam lines indicated on the pattern. Slash inward corner. Grade seam. Turn right side out. I used a Schmetz universal needle size 75 or 11 to sew this vintage dress. It sewed beautifully and evenly through the sheeting. I recently bought some Schmetz universal sewing needles from Amazon.ca in one of my Amazon sewing haul videos. The link to the video is at the top of the screen. Next, I pinned the front to the back at the side seams, and then I pinned the front to the back at the shoulder seams. One thing I forgot to mention earlier was interfacing. All views of this pattern require interfacing. The instructions said, cut interfacing using facing pieces 5 and 6. Trim off 3/8 of an inch on the long unnotched edge. The pattern calls for woven interfacing to be basted to the neckline of the dress, but I used fusible interfacing instead. This wasn't a problem since the dress was 100% polyester. I pressed all my seams and clipped all my curves as I went along in the instructions. In the past, I was not a fan of pressing my sewing, but in recent years I've seen the difference that it makes to the garment. I press the neck darts towards the center, the elbow darts downward, and all the seams open. Pressing my seams as I sew gave me more confidence in the project that I was working on. I turned the dickie right side out and pressed it. It looked fantastic already, and I wasn't even done. Since I pressed the dickie so well, I didn't bother to pin the lower part of the dickie that needed to be sewn closed. In addition to the thread and the 22-inch neck type zipper, this pattern required the following notions: 3 hooks and eyes, 1 for each view, 12 snaps for view A, 12 snaps for view B for a total of 24, and double fold bias tape for view A. After I turned the cuffs the right side out and pressed them, it was time for the bias tape. I bought a package of 3.65 meters or 4 yards of double fold black bias tape for $2.80 from Fabricland online. When I chose the bias tape for this pattern, I picked the regular width rather than the extra wide. I didn't want the bias tape on the cuffs to be too noticeable, so I went with the narrower tape. At the sewing machine, I sewed the front to the back at the shoulder seams. You may wonder why I use universal needles for most of my sewing projects. This is because universal needles have characteristics of both sharps and ballpoint needles and can be used with many different fabrics. It's a sharp needle with an ever so slightly rounded tip and is therefore suitable for both woven and knit fabrics. A universal needle keeps me from changing the needle when sewing assembly line style through my multiple patterns and fabrics. Then I sewed the front to the back at the side seams. If I don't like the results of the universal needle, I would switch to the sharp needle for wovens. Sharp needles cut through the fibers of woven fabric cleanly and easily. Sharps come in different thicknesses, for example, fine microtex needles and sturdy leather needles. In addition, needles for specialty threads such as embroidery or metallic thread are also types of sharps that have large eyes to reduce friction on delicate embroidery thread. Before reading my Singer sewing book, I was not aware that there were special needles for metallic thread. I sewed a stack of Christmas gift bags with my silver metallic thread using a regular sharp needle. Now I know why the thread broke more often than other threads. It was the needle. Then I sewed the double fold bias tape to the cuff edges. Another great thing about vintage patterns is the numbered notches. I like how the notches are numbered in this pattern so you won't mistake which notches to pin together. For example, if there's a notch 1 on the body of the dress, that would match to notch 1 of the sleeve. It just makes sewing that much easier. I was impressed with how the cuffs turned out. They look really sharp with the double fold bias tape trim. Next, I pinned the hem. I folded over the edge of the skirt, 1/2 inch, and then folded it over 1 inch and then pinned it. Step 6 of the instructions is about finishing the lower edge. It said, try on dress. Mark hemline, turn up hem, baste, trim to an even width, machine baste 1/4 inch from the upper edge. Pull up bobbin thread to ease in fullness. Press, pink, overcast machine zigzag or bind upper edge, sew with an invisible stitch. Then I pin the facing to the neck edge with the right sides facing. I love vintage sewing patterns. One of my favorites is Simplicity 6082. I bought this stunning vintage pattern from Good Value Thrift Store in downtown London, Ontario for $2. It was published in 1973 and is a jiffy knit dress in 2 lengths. This flare dress is sized for stretch knits only, has a low round neckline, a back zipper, and top stitching trim. The short dress has long set-in sleeves. The long dress has short sleeves. I made my dress with the long sleeves and the lower calf length rather than ankle length, and I didn't add the back zipper since it's a knit dress. The lovely fabric came from the clearance section at Fabricland for $4.25 a meter. It's a wonderful knit polyester with various shades of green, blue, and white flowers on a black background. It's soft and smooth and comfortable to wear. I love this Simplicity pattern so much that I've cut out another one. I bought this baby blue knit fabric from Len's Mill Store during their 75 to 85% off sale. There's 7.5 meters of it, so there's lots of it. Can you believe I paid only $4.87 for all of it? The original price of the fabric was $4.61 a meter for a total of $32.50, but I paid $4.87 for it all. Such a great price. I think it's perfect for Simplicity 6082. Then I pin the sleeve into the armhole. Before I began pinning, I stitched a row of basting stitches in between the notches on the sleeve to ease the sleeve into the armhole. The instructions said, pin sleeve into armhole, matching underarm circles and large circles to shoulder seam. Starting at the large circle, pull up the bobbin thread so that the sleeve fits. Baste, adjusting the ease, and stitch. At the sewing machine, I sewed the sleeve into the dress, removing the pins as I sewed. The next time I sew a sleeve into a garment, I'm going to baste it in place before machine stitching. I was poked too many times on this project. Another one of my favorite vintage sewing patterns is Simplicity 6260. I bought Simplicity 6260 for $2 at Good Value Thrift Store with a stack of other vintage patterns. This pattern was published in 1974 and is a jiffy knit short front wrap dress sized for stretch knits only. The front wrap dress with drop shoulders features a V-shaped neckline and self-tie ends. View 1 has tri-colored braid trim and View 2 has top stitching trim. The suggested fabrics were stretchable jersey knits of polyester, cotton, rayon, or acetate, such as matte jersey or tricot. Stretchable double knits of polyester, cotton, or wool are also recommended. For my own unique look, I lengthened the skirt of the dress by 7 inches so that it fell below the knee, and I used 2 gorgeous knit fabrics for a designer look. The first fabric I chose was the light blue knit that comprised the majority of the dress. I bought it at Value Village for $4.99 for the whole piece. I can't remember the exact dimensions of the fabric, but in addition to this dress, I was able to lengthen another dress featured in my Decorating Easter Eggs video. And then I used the remaining remnants for the yoke, sleeve bands, and neckband of McCall's 7869, a pullover top that features length, sleeve, and fabric variations. View C, the version I made up, has a contrast yoke. The link to the sew along video for McCall's 7869 is at the top of the screen. Then I sewed the facing to the neck edge, right sides together, pivoting at the V. Since I lengthened Simplicity 6260, I didn't have quite enough fabric for the additional length, so I used a darker knit fabric for the bottom portion of the dress. This fabric was the same fabric I used to make vintage jiffy dress Simplicity 6082. I wanted the dress to look as though it was made out of 2 fabrics on purpose, so I cut the front and back facing, as well as the tie ends, out of the same fabric. I folded the facings outward and top stitched down to create a trimmed look rather than tuck the facings underneath. I also added a facing to the drop sleeves, and it turned out just like the front and back facings to create a continuous look. I love how the 2 fabrics came together. I think that it looks quite designer. I chose to sew my hem with a regular stitch instead of the blind hem stitch because I wanted the hem on the dress to match the top stitching on the sleeves. My Singer's sewing book said, unless it is decorative, the hem for most garments should be virtually invisible from the right side. Use thread of the same shade or slightly darker than your fabric. My Singer's sewing book also recommended that before hemming, let the garment hang for 24 hours, especially if it has a bias or circular hem. Try on the garment over the undergarments you will wear with it. Check to be sure it fits and hangs correctly. Wear shoes and a belt if the garment is to be belted. Then I pinned the hems on the sleeves and also pinned along the neckline. The neckline will also be top stitched. Next, I sewed the bottom of the dickie closed. Then I top stitched the neckline of the dress. This step is not in the instructions, but I top stitched the neckline so that it matched the top stitching of the sleeves. The instructions to finish the neck edge were understitch the facing, turn to the inside, press, catch stitch at the seams, turn the back edges and hem to the zipper tape. I think that top stitching makes garments look designer, and I've had some lovely compliments on the red top stitching on my Vogue 9282 jeans. Vogue 9282 is a pattern for semi-fitted pants with no waistband, a back zipper, and leg variations. View A's pants are cropped above the ankle. View B and C are full length. Views A and B have slits at the hemline with buttons. I made view C, but with 2 alterations. I lengthened the pants by 4 inches along the lengthen and shorten lines, and I moved the zipper from the back of the pants to the front. I sewed and top stitched all my seams with red thread. Then I sewed the hem on the sleeves. The instructions said to sew this hem with an invisible stitch, but I decided to use a regular stitch because I wanted the stitching to be visible to match the top stitching. Then I sewed a hook and eye to the neck edge of the dickie. The next step was the snaps. The snaps are sewn to the other side of the dickie, but I flipped it over to the back so you could see my thread marks for the snaps. Since I sewed the ball sections of the snaps to the neckband, I sewed the socket sections of the snaps to the neck facing of the dress. Then I pinned the front neckband to the detachable collar. The instructions said, baste collar to the neck edge of the neckband, right sides up, matching notches, collar circles to shoulder seams, and have the back edges at the center back and the front edges of the collar at the circle. Then I sewed the front neckband to the detachable collar. This step I did incorrectly the first time. Originally, I stitched the plain white front neckband facing to the collar, but then I had to unpick it. I mixed up my neckband and facing because they're both cut from piece 11. If I had left the white fabric, this would be visible under the collar. I wanted the visible parts of the collar to be the printed fabric and all the facings to be white. Then I pinned the front neckband facing to the collar. The instructions said, clip inward corner of the neckband facing to the point of reinforcement stitching. Pin the facing to the neck edge, bringing the front ends of the collar through the front center clip. Then I sewed the front neckband facing to the detachable collar. I really struggled with the collar of view A. I really struggled. I think I sewed it 4 times and unpicked it at least 3. I'm really lucky that my trusty polyester didn't show any signs of wear. I think that part of my problem was using a different fabric for the back of the collar and back of the neckband, but then realizing I sewed it backwards. But the major issue was clipping the front neckband and bringing the front ends of the collar through the center front. It would bunch up or it wouldn't lay flat. In the end, I got it right, but it took a lot of time and patience. Then I turned the facing to the inside and basted it along the neck edge. This is an important step for me because I wanted the collar to lay flat and any shifting of the facing would have messed it up. Instead of pivoting at the circle or the reinforcement point, I backstitched and ended my stitching. Then I started stitching at the other side of the facing and sewed to the circle or the reinforcement point. Next, I basted the raw edges together. This stitching held the raw edges of the neckband and neckband facings together so that they could be encased in double fold bias tape. I love the damask print of this fabric. I'm looking forward to showing you the dress that I made from the other half of the sheet. So stay tuned to Budget Sew for the sew along to Butterick 6168. Then I pinned the bias tape to the detachable collar's neckband. The instructions said, encase raw edges with double fold bias tape, turning in ends and mitering corners. It seems I struggle a bit with sewing collars. I had a bit of difficulty sewing the collar of Vogue 8992, a lined wrap dress fitted through the bust that had the front collar, the front extending into a collar, princess seams, inside ties, and hook and eye closing. It had narrow hems and top stitching and included a stitch hem on the sleeves. I bought this pattern from the discard bin at Fabricland for $5.99. The regular price was $29.95. You may recognize this dress from my We Want Quant free vintage patterns video. The link to that video is at the top of the screen. The recommended fabrics were crepe, lightweight denim, silk, and tweed. I chose 100% polyester for both the dress and the lining. I bought the navy blue 150 centimeter wide woven fabric for $4 a meter at Fabricland, and I used 3.2 meters. The lining is a pinky peach with black designs that I bought about 10 years ago from Len's Mill. I ran into only one problem when making up this pattern, and that was the collar. Step 23 of the instructions said, pin back lining to front lining and facing at shoulders and back neck edge to collar, clipping back lining where necessary, then baste. Stitch pivoting at small circles. I really struggled with this step because no matter what I did, the pieces wouldn't line up. I actually set this dress aside for about a month before gaining the confidence to try again. Even though I initially struggled with the pattern, I love how it came together and I love how it looks. Then I sewed the bias tape to the collar. Another great dress with a gorgeous collar is Vogue 8408. Vogue 8408 is a dress and belt pattern that was published in 2007. This princess seamed dress has an oversized collar, top stitching, and back slits. View A is sleeveless and View B has long sleeves. There are optional trims including buttons and buttonhole stitches, and the belt has top stitching as well. The dress fabric I chose was a lovely large houndstooth pattern in black, brown, and white. I bought this knit fabric at Fabricland in the clearance section for the very low price of $1.75 a meter, and I bought the last of the bolt for a total of 3.7 meters. Then I sewed the hook and eye to the detachable collar. Before cutting Vogue 8408 out of fabric, I lengthened the skirt of the pattern by 22 centimeters so that it fell below the knee. I also replaced the slits in the back of the skirt with kick pleats. The pattern called for a side zipper, but since my dress is made from a knit fabric, I didn't add it because I didn't think it was necessary. View B, the long sleeve version, called for 4 buttons and 4 buttonholes on the collar, but my buttons were not very noticeable because of the large houndstooth print of the fabric, so I didn't add them. Then I sewed the snaps to the neckband of the detachable collar. I bought 3 packages of Dritz sew-on snaps from Amazon.ca for $2.98 each. They're size 1/0 and made from nickel-plated brass. The sewing pattern instructions did not say what size of snaps were required, so I took my best guess when ordering off Amazon. These snaps were perfect. Here is the finished dress.
I hope you enjoyed my sew along to McCall's 2138. Subscribe to BudgetSew for more great videos. Thanks for watching. See you next time.